All right, everyone. So I got myself a new laptop. So this is the new camera. Here we go. I want to talk to you guys about 9/11. Really, people don't care so much about 9/11 anymore, but I remember when 9/11 was still a huge focal point of conversation in American political discourse. Uh, Looking at the term September the 11th, to me, I know it's a date, but looking at the upper right-hand corner of my computer screen, I see Sep 11. And I know it's a date, but to my mind, it's more like a hieroglyph that represents what happened on that day in 2001. I was pretty much 11 years old because my birthday is on September the 18th, so pretty much 11 years old. I remember I was sleeping, did not want to go to school. You sleep so well on the mornings that you're supposed to be going to school. And my mother was screaming from her bedroom, Ted, get up, look at what's happening. I got up, went to the room, looked at the television screen, and there it was, the two buildings on fire, smoke billowing. And I kept watching, and boom, there was the third airplane. And I remember going to school, and we all felt united. We were all terrified. We were all shocked. The teachers were talking about how we were all in a state of war, and we were all full of consternation. We were all talking about Osama bin Laden and what was going to happen to him and how America was going to go and kill his ass, and that didn't happen for a very long time. And we were all united. And really, I have never felt a more united America than on the day of September the 11th and the subsequent months after that terrorist attack. I want to say the next 3 months. That was the time that I feel America was the most united. I've never felt that. I never felt that ever again. I haven't felt that ever again. Even when ISIS was cutting people up and hanging people from meat hooks, I have never felt a more united America than at the moment of September the 11th, 2001, and within the next 3 months after the attack. But other than that, I've never really felt in an atmosphere that was united in this country. And I remember my father being called to no end by people that we knew and by people in the media. Because in the 1990s, my father was one of the few people in the United States telling people about the dangers of Islamic fundamentalism. My father was the first ex-Muslim to come out to warn people about the dangers of Islamic fundamentalism. But in the 1990s, my father's audience was limited to the church that we were going to on Sunday mornings and a friend's church, and basically the infantile stage of what we call the internet. The internet was a brand new thing in the 1990s, and my father immediately used it to his advantage to reach people who felt the same way about Islam, or to reach ex-Muslims, or to reach Muslims who wanted to debate. And I remember very well my father debating people on AOL Instant Messenger in the 1990s. But that was pretty much it. The discourse regarding the dangers of Islam was pretty much limited to the internet and to churches. And I remember my father telling people in our Baptist church about the dangers of Islam, and nobody wanted to listen. Very few people wanted to listen. There were some people who did, but most did not. And I remember the pastor, the Baptist minister, taking my father aside and saying, "Stop talking about this Islam stuff. We have more important matters. We're trying to reach the Jehovah's Witnesses. We're not trying to reach Muslims in this church, sir." Of course, my father did not listen. But on that day, September the 11th, 2001, everything changed. My father's life changed. Our lives changed. We changed as our lives as a family changed because the phone never stopped ringing. The damn thing was blaring like Christmas lights. People from church were calling, "Oh my goodness, you were right, tell us more." People at the church wanted to know more about Islam. All of a sudden, my dad was getting invited to speak at other places, synagogues, other churches, mainly synagogues at that time. My dad all of a sudden was on a radio show, the Tovia Singer Show. It was a Jewish radio show to talk about the dangers of Islam. All of a sudden, synagogues wanted my dad to speak at their locations, and my dad began to speak at all these synagogues. Pretty soon, it became a yearly event for my dad to be invited to a synagogue in New York City, and then he would come home and live his regular life. At that time, my father was working as a computer programmer for C&H Sugar. So my father continued that job, but when he had free time, he would go to these events that he was invited to, mainly synagogues. And he would also speak in the radio. A couple of years later, I remember walking out of my home to go to school, and I saw this large African-American man with a suit in front of our house. He looked like the guy from Green Mile. And I was like, who is this? And then I found out that that was the guy who was going to drive my dad to the Fox News studio. So my father became a commentator, political commentator, to talk about all things Islamic terrorism. And people were still in the atmosphere of shock from the 9/11 attacks. And so my dad was being invited all the time, Fox News, CNN, etc. And this was pretty much how it was in our family when I was in middle school and when I was in high school, especially when I was a freshman in high school and also when I was in the 8th grade in middle school. My father was being invited to all sorts of universities, major universities. My father was like Ben Shapiro. Not in the sense that they talked about the same things, although they do overlap. They both talk about the dangers of Islam. In that case, they are similar. But my father was like Ben Shapiro in the sense that he was being invited all the time, invited to this university, that university. Journalists, I remember, would come over to our home to talk about Islam. And they would bring their little cassette tape recorders and record the conversation, old school journalism. Pretty fascinating. And that's what it was, all the time. And Islam became a buzzword. A lot of people were talking about Islam. People were coming out of the woodworks talking about Islam. You had intellectuals like Robert Spencer, bloggers like Pamela Geller, provocateurs like Christopher Hitchens talking about Islam. It became cool to bash Islam. All of a sudden, Bill Maher was talking about Islam. Richard Dawkins was talking about Islam. And Islam the battle against Islamic fundamentalism went from being something that Christians did, ex-Muslims who converted to Christianity did, to something that everybody did. Atheists, pagans, evangelicals, even some Catholics. And ISIS came, and that was a huge thing. And all of a sudden, Islam became something that was used for various agendas. Atheists were using it to bash religion. Pagans were using it as a way to foment ideas of European nationalism. And it no longer was just something that Christians exposed. It was something that people attacked for the cause of provocation, getting attention, getting money, and bolstering a particular political agenda, be it nationalism, be it atheism. We saw this with Christopher Hitchens and all these things. 9/11 was also, and we all know this, it became a propaganda tool for the U.S. government to justify the war in Iraq. The war in Iraq, as we all know, devastated Iraq. And the destabilization that resulted from that war spilled over into Syria. And that escalated the Syrian civil war. It acted as a catalyst towards the Syrian conflict. The violence in Iraq and in Syria led to the migrant crisis of 2015, which helped to foment ultranationalism and the far right in Europe. And all of a sudden, you had these fringe political parties gaining prominent positions in various European parliaments, be it the Freedom Party in the Netherlands or the Forum for Democracy Party in also in the Netherlands, the AFD in Germany. All of these various parties became prominent due to the migrant crisis, which was a result of the destabilization in Iraq and Syria, which were results of the Iraq War. And all this can be traced back to the 9/11 attacks, which were then used as propaganda to justify the Iraq War. And here we are today, not talking about 9/11 really as much. Of course, the year after 9/11, we talked about 9/11. It was a huge subject. The year after that, it was a huge subject. Going into Bush's second term, it was a huge subject. Going into Obama's first term, it was a huge subject. But then I would say within the second term of Obama's presidency, it no longer was something that people cared too much about. And today, we really don't care about it at all. I mean, I don't know. I don't really watch sports, but you guys can tell me, did they talk about 9/11 in any of the sports events, in any of the football games? I don't know. All I can say is that I can tell you right now that it's not really a huge subject. There's probably been more attention towards the death of the Queen than 9/11, which is crazy to me. But here we are. We don't talk about 9/11, just like Pearl Harbor. We don't talk about Pearl Harbor anymore. And yeah, we just don't care because that's how people are. We have to wait for the next big attack so that people can then start talking about their national security. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.